But the Lord said to him, "Not so. Anyone who kills Cain will suffer vengeance 7 times over." Then the Lord put a mark on Cain, so that no one who found him would kill him. I could see the light going out of her eyes. That was always the sign I looked for, as a mark that it had begun. Slowly and in fits they would suffer these half-deaths in my presence. This momentary catatonia. It was then that I knew that they had seen it, and from then, it was only a matter of time. It had taken a couple of months with Grace. We met at a bar. I had spent the evening drinking alone, which had become my Saturday ritual. She met my gaze from across the room and, Christ, it was exactly like the old cliché. We both felt the magic at the same instant, I'm sure of it, because she walked right up to me and introduced herself. From that moment on, I knew I'd be powerless against her. All she had to do was touch my arm to seal the deal. I tried to stop myself. I really did. But there was nothing I could do. What I had intended to be a one-night stand turned once more into a regular thing, and we were all but officially dating 2 weeks later. It had gone so well that I even managed to convince myself that the inevitable wouldn't happen this time around, that Grace was different. She wasn't. One night as we sat across from each other at my dining room table, I saw her gaze drawn to my chest. It lingered there slightly too long, and it took my calling her name twice before she came back to earth. "Sorry," she said, slightly breathless. For the remainder of the conversation, her typical enthusiasm was replaced with a dull, pensive gaze, which returned again and again to my chest on the left side. I tried to tell myself that it was nothing, that she was merely tired. However, the same thing happened the next night, and every night until she broke it off over text. "Sorry, it's just not going to work out. Goodbye, Lou." And that was the end of it. That night in the shower, I ran my finger over the left side of my chest and peered down, ignoring the incredible strain this awkward angle placed on my neck and back. A small, misshapen dark mark pushed just beneath the surface of my skin, like a neon sign in reverse. And for what seemed like the millionth time, I scrubbed at it with ferocity. This only resulted in the skin surrounding the mark turning pink and then red, before slowly fading back to its normal color. Doctor after doctor had insisted that it wasn't there, and most people seemed totally oblivious to it. The mark only ever seemed to reveal itself to the people I really cared about, and then, after an unpredictable length of time. Grace had been slow on the uptake. Some girls seemed to notice it hours or minutes after meeting me. The previous record had been held by a dark-skinned brunette whose name I can no longer recall. It had taken her a week to see it. But it always revealed itself eventually, and it always drove them away. I felt stupid for crying over her. What had I expected? That somehow I could suddenly rewrite the laws of nature and make a lasting connection? It had never been so, and never could be. Later that night I got blind drunk. Literally. I was so plastered that everything spun and I couldn't keep my eyes focused. This resulted in a face-down nap in my laundry hamper. This might have been funny under different circumstances, but I wasn't in the laughing mood. When I woke, it was with a start which disturbed my precarious position and left me and my dirty clothes in a heap on the floor. The pain was nothing compared to my headache. Through bleary eyes, I peered at my phone and winced as the light sent sharp stabs of pain through my skull. After blinking a few times, I could handle looking at it for a few moments, and saw that I had apparently spent most of the night calling Grace. She had not picked up even once, but had sent me a text comprised of the ominous and definitive message, blocking this number, don't call again. Another man might have felt himself in the right, despite his inebriated state, and insisting on closure after something like this. I didn't need it, however. I knew why she had left. A lot of the rest of the day was spent in the dark, with an ice pack on my head, trying to recover the ability to handle light and sound. I called into work sick with an unconvincing excuse, which my supervisor had received with the appropriate tone of skepticism. I didn't care. The following day, it was time to give my presentation to the board. Having lost the previous 24 hours to the application of various hangover remedies drawn from the internet in the few seconds of time in which I could find to tolerate the searing pain of my phone screen, the version of the presentation I ultimately ended up giving was barely adequate. At least I hoped it had been. I noticed a female board member stifling laughter during some of my particularly absurd displays of ineptitude, such as attempting, and failing, to correctly pronounce Mozambique 4 consecutive times. For whatever reason, this seemed to be a positive sign. Or just wishful thinking. Just 10 minutes before the end of the day, I heard a knock on my office door and called out to whomever had made it. "Come in." And when I turned to see who it was, I was shocked to find my doorstep darkened by the female board member from earlier. "Hi, Lou, right?" I nodded and realized that I didn't even know her name. "Do you want to join me after work for drinks?" She could get in serious trouble for even asking that question, and I experienced 1,000 emotions at once, the more lurid of which eventually won out. "Sure," I said. "All right. I'll see you at the bar down the street then. Say 5:30? Again, I nodded. She turned and swept out of the room, closing the door as she did so. Maybe my luck is turning around after all, I murmured to myself. She showed up at 5:30, though I had believed seriously that she would not. We sat down next to each other. I ordered a beer and she something suitably feminine. Precisely what I can't recall. As we began talking, it occurred to me again that I didn't even know her name, and knowing that it was impossible to continue a conversation forever without that knowledge, I simply asked her what it was. "Oh yes, of course you don't know my name," she laughed. "I'm a new addition to the board. I'm Claire." She said this, extending her hand, and took it in mine. Soft, smooth, warm. "So, was my presentation really that good?" I asked, smiling a little. "No, it was quite awful," she answered, returning a smile and placing her hand on top of mine. "But let's forget about that. Maybe we should forget the drinks altogether and go straight back to my place." And as she said this, I choked a little on the sip I had just taken. "Really?" I asked stupidly. "Really?" she said, maintaining eye contact. I stood dreamily and allowed her to lead me outside into her car, entirely forgetting about mine, or what would happen to it were I to leave it on the sidewalk for the rest of the night. But just as she was about to turn to open the car door, something stopped her, and she looked at me strangely, directly at the left side of my chest. "I'm sorry, Lou. I just remembered, my sister's coming tonight. I can't. I'll see you later." And with that, she stepped into the car and drove off into the night. Later that night, I woke up in front of the TV with several bottles of beer covering my body, and the TV blaring. My head killed. Sometimes a shower can help with that, so I walked into the bathroom and waited for the hot water to start flowing. Once inside the shower, I sighed deeply and pressed my forehead against the wall, a position with which I was all too familiar. "Oh, that's a record, I think," I say to myself. "Only took her half a day." Then I glowered at the mark over my heart. It pulsed gently, like it was mocking me. In a fit of sudden clarity, I grabbed a pair of fingernail scissors, which were lying on the little shower shelf which held various hygiene products. Then, without a moment's hesitation, brought it to my chest, ignoring the pain and spilling forth my lifeblood into the greedy showerhead stream. It mingled with the water, forming snake-like trendles of scarlet and whisking themselves away down the drain. I dragged the scissors around the mark, cutting deep in order to ensure that the scissors had punctured every layer of skin. The surge of adrenaline was weakening somewhat, and the first scream fell from my lips as my fingers dug in between the severed and healthy flesh and tore the patch of skin off, bringing forth a torrent of blood, almost black in its thickness. Then, triumphantly, I hurled the mark down the drain and grabbed a roll of medical gauze from the cupboard next to the shower, spilling water and blood all over as I did so. The gauze soaked through, and I replaced it accordingly, then proceeded to dry and clothe myself. After replacing the gauze several times, I began to fear that the amount of left in my first aid kit wouldn't be sufficient. For a little while, my arms grew weak, and I further feared that the whole thing might have been a serious miscalculation on my part. But eventually the blood did stop, and the strength returned to my limbs after several hours spent lying on my bed. Some of that effect may have been due to my liver processing some of the alcohol circulating in my bloodstream. Blood loss and alcohol don't mix well after all. So after recovering my strength, I stood and hobbled back into the bathroom to get a clear look at my handiwork. While covered in gauze and blood, it was difficult to say whether or not my goal had been achieved, but it looked pretty comprehensive to me, and so, satisfied, I fell back onto my couch and returned to the void of unconsciousness. When I woke, it was not immediately obvious how much time had passed. After checking my watch, I saw that it was 10:30 the next day. Fortunately, it was Saturday. It occurred to me then that the gauze would no doubt need changing, and so I dragged myself back into the bathroom and peeled it off my skin, no doubt bringing some of the skin with it. But as my fingers fumbled with the first aid kit, the sight of the wound was enough to send me staggering backward and nearly into the tub. Not because it was especially grisly or infected in any way. No. It was because of what I saw embedded right at the center of the congealed blood and newly forming scab. At that very spot, exactly where it had been before, was a small, misshapen, dark mark which pulsed just beneath the surface of the scab, like a neon sign in reverse.